How did the kid from your school die? Testicular cancer at age 12. Really nice boy too. I don't remember what age it was in grade school, but leukemia. I only met him a couple times because he was too sick to go to school regularly. He just joined our homeroom one day, and then a few months later stopped coming. I didn't really understand at the time, nor did I understand why we planted a tree for him until many years later. I think about him from time to time. I was about 13 or 14, and he was about 12 minus 13 at the oldest. We went to church together. I was great friends with his whole family. Watched him deteriorate from colon cancer, even though I had worked for the funeral home and had put caskets smaller than me into the ground. That was the first time I had seen someone I knew that was younger than me go into the ground. He was a great kid too, barely even got a chance to live. Group of kids got skunk drunk and decided to take a ride down a notoriously winding road. One guy was standing in the back of the truck and fell out as they rounded one of the hairpin curves, didn't make it. Drunk teens went for a joyride and ran into a tree. None of them was old enough to drive. We were in middle school. I believe it was the passenger in the front seat that died, but the driver was in the hospital for at least a week. There was a lot of talk and remembrance at school for him. Then in high school, my neighbor's boyfriend, Odd. The only reason I knew was through friends. The school never addressed it, I imagine because he was a bit of a troublemaker. Fight with another kid. Got punched in the head, hit the ground, lights out. I was friends with both of them. For those asking what happened to the other kid, I don't know. I never saw him again. He was 11, which is too young for juvenile detention in California. Some of the boys were out back behind the school smoking during lunch break. One kid like grade 7 to 8-ish was pestering everyone for a smoke before trying to grab one from an older student's hand, grade 11-12-ish. Older kid gave him a punch to the head, not a very hard one mind you, it was more like rough housing than an actual attempt at violence. Kid was fine, gave back the ciggy after taking a few puffs, lunch ended and everyone went back to classes. Then about an hour or so later the kid just drops from his seat in the middle of class not breathing. Teacher performs CPR while another student runs to the office to get them to call an ambulance, but he was dead before they could get there. The little love tap he got earlier caused a bleed on the brain, ruptured an aneurysm that was already there. It's scary that such a weak blow to the head can be fatal, and it's not like the kid lived in a bubble or anything. He was into BMX and ice hockey and other sports. How many times had he fallen off his bike or been slammed to the ice with that ticking time bomb in his brain? Since I'm getting asked a lot, the older boy who threw the punch did not get into any trouble. The parents did try to have him charged with something, but nothing stuck since there was no evidence of prior bullying or violence between them, no intent to cause harm or excessive force, and no real proof that the aneurysm ruptured due to the punch. A sneeze or bad cough could have set it off. I wasn't close with them or anyone who really knew them, so I don't know if the older kid felt any guilt or had any issues afterwards, but he did attend the church service held for all the grieving students. Of all things, an unfortunate camping accident. This was before cell phones. Two friends went out for the weekend to a campground for some fishing over the weekend. When they didn't arrive home at the time they said they would, the parents called the provincial park to see if they were running a bit late. The weather wasn't great and the camp was about an hour away from town, so it was entirely possible they decided to stay another night and drive out in the morning instead. The park warden stumbled upon their campsite and found both of them dead in their shared tent. Turns out it was a cool night and they decided to run a small heater in the tent to be warm. But it was an old heater that didn't have a shut-off sensor built in. The heater ran all night while they were asleep, and since they didn't open the flaps on their tent for air circulation because they wanted to trap the heat, the tent filled with carbon monoxide and suffocated them in their sleep. So sad, and a week before school too. Playing along a fast-moving creek deep in the woods. First teen gets pulled under really fast. Second one immediately runs and dives in to find him. A minute later, first teen comes back up on the other side, exhausted but thankfully unhurt. Guy who went in to find him was not coming back up. Was in the days before cell phones. Had to run a good mile back up the trail, hop in the car, drive to the nearby park ranger office, East Texas Big Thicket area, and report, get help, along with guide rescuers. Took about 30 minutes total to get back out there to the accident. Still no sign of him. Rescue workers found that under the higher waters were tons of plant, tree debris everywhere. 2 days of removal while still trying to control fast-moving waters, his body was finally found. He had dived too deep trying to find the first friend, getting trapped under the submerged branches without enough energy or breath to fight against the current to get out and back up. He was only 15. Suicide in the forest behind my garden, hung himself in his closet with a belt in 9th grade. He'd been in my earth science class and then just wasn't there anymore. Poor guy had been bullied for years due to his Eastern European accent and being underweight. Kids are cruel and the rest of us never stepped in to stop it. We're all accountable. Rip Nicky. Just didn't wake up one morning. His mom found him dead in his bed. Turned out he had some condition they had no way of knowing about. Can't imagine anything worse as a parent. He was just eating his dinner and died. In my country, we have a big final exam that directly decides what course we get into. Every student your age in the country takes the exact same exam at the exact same time. He just finished this exam, and his parents had to open up the results and see if he would have gotten his course 2 months after he died. I don't know if he did, but still, this day should be a celebration, but instead the government hands them a piece of paper that tells them how bright his future was. He and 2 friends were around with a shotgun. It was loaded and at him. One of the friends, the one holding the gun, I believe, committed suicide a month or so later from the guilt. This happened with the popular senior at our high school. It was a house party and pretty much every kid there was drunk. He talked his girlfriend into aiming the shotgun at him and pulling the trigger, promising it was unloaded. His face and chest took the blast. She was ed up for a very, very long time. His family went out of their way to make sure that her rehabilitation and anything else she needed for help was covered. Grade 5, he was playing with his little brother when they found their dad's duty pistol. Little brother shot him right between the eyes. Can't imagine how the little brother feels. Was about 50 years ago. My friend's grandfather told me a story of finding and playing an antique gun that was on display in his father's home at age 5. He took the gun and clicked it right in his brother's brow. Thank God nothing happened. His brother was his best friend until he died at age 80. Imagine the horror. If you keep guns in the house, it's never too early to teach gun safety. Even if you don't like guns, teach gun safety. God bless. Grade school, rainy day, bell rang and little girl panicked about being late, ran out in front of a school bus. I saw it happen, was talking with my friend, looking at him, when his eyes got wide and looked behind me. Saw a young girl face down on the pavement, got hit running across the street, survived broken leg and a few other things. Bothered me that she was left face down on the pavement for several minutes while medics arrived, about a foot behind the exhaust pipe of a school bus. Another bus had hit her as it was driving to park behind the school bus. She ended up a foot behind. I think if she hit it during her ragdoll, it'd have been far worse than a broken leg. He was playing football and randomly passed out, never woke up again. Happened to one of my athletes a few years ago. At the time, I had a day job in the morning, so I covered after school practices and the head coach covered mornings. So, I wasn't there to witness it. This is what I was told. Everyone was doing sprint warm-ups on the football field. They just started and everyone was chatting and laughing down the field while picking up pace down the field. Around the 50-yard line, one runner's shoe came off. He bent down to tie it and keeled over face down. They thought he was joking until one of the girls went back and tried to pull him up and he was dead weight. One of the boys sprinted to the office, no phones on them during practice, and got the assistant principal who came and started CPR while 911 was called. He sent the kids away and worked on him until the ambulance got there. He was unresponsive and blood was pooling out of his mouth, died right there. He was a freshman. He had a childhood heart condition but has been cleared for all activity by a physician. Also turns out the head coach was in his office when all of those went down. The first few minutes of the incident, the kids were alone. Don't know if immediate CPR would have saved him, but someone should have been there. Parents sued the district and won. Kidnapped, raped, and murdered by a serial pedophile, or nicknamed the man with the mask, during school camp. We played together 3 days before. Theo had a spree over decades in different countries. Craziest part is, a soldier stationed close to the campsite saw the man and my friend in a car during a night run in the woods. Shortly after, the The soldier was sent to Iraq. Years later, after he returned, he heard about the case and remembered that night and the car model he saw. This clue led to the arrest, trial, and sentence of a previous suspect. There was the one kid in elementary school who was riding his bike and got hit by a car. The school's infinite wisdom was to reiterate the dangers of not wearing your helmet while riding a bike. Fantastic memorial. There was the guy who drunk drove into a pole to avoid a squirrel, as the surviving passengers put it. But the hardest one to think about was my kindergarten classmate. She survived, but her baby sister was Ed in the Oklahoma City bombing. 3 people died shortly after graduation in a head-on collision with a semi-truck. Since I've had a couple people ask, this was in northern CA, Sacramento area. 2 of my good friends were driving home after school, just shooting the breeze and listening to music. This was in the Sierra foothills, also northern California. The kid driving reached down to change the station and went off the road. The vehicle flipped, and both were thrown out and pinned. The passenger bled out and died, but not before telling the driver not to blame himself. He still does, 30 years later, but has come to terms with it. I'm glad he made it through the worst of it and has had a decent life. It was heartbreaking. At the funeral, the little brother said loudly, "Why is X sleeping? Awful." I don't think anyone I went to school with is dead yet, but I know one of my old classmates is on death row in Florida, so that's gotta count for something. Not in my school. A family in the area I knew. 3 boys, oldest son shot himself. Was hiding in a doghouse with the police closing in. Second son died while on death row for murder. Third son died of congestive heart failure at 24 due to sustained massive drug abuse, leaving behind a wife and son. Like 5 of them died of drunk driving accidents, 3 of them at one time. Little redneck school in the middle of nowhere. Apparently people seem to think drinking and driving is the only way to have fun. We may have gone to the same high school. A bonus one that made national news but was not my high school was a convoy of 3-5 cars, and all but one were in various stages of intoxication. The 2 lead cars were racing. One swerved to avoid an oncoming car and went in the ditch, came back out and caused a multi-car accident. Multiple teens dead. Ran over a nest of wasps in his riding mower. Went into anaphylactic shock. Ran over by the mower. I saw a man nearly get run over by his own riding lawnmower one day. I was driving a road on the way out of town, and ahead I see this guy on a riding lawnmower cutting the grass in the drainage ditch in front of his house. He's driving along a slope, and the mower is tilting right. He sees a beer can that someone has tossed from a car in his ditch and decides he's just gonna reach down and snag it while mowing. The mower hits the tipping point, and the man falls face first to the ground, with his limbs sprawled. As he committed to falling, he kind of kicked the mower back upright, but while falling he had turned the wheel to the right, where he was now laying. I thought for sure I was about to see someone get cut up and probably bleed out, before medics could get there from 12 miles away. Thankfully, he popped up in time and turned the mower off. Looked embarrassed as hell, but at least that's all he had to deal with. I asked him if he was okay, and he kind of nodded and laughed. Then I could laugh to relieve my stress. If I could give some advice to younger people not so familiar with lawn machinery and power tools, never underestimate how dangerous a powered blade is. They're specifically designed to cut things well. Treat it like a loaded gun. Suicide. Sadly, we had 2 die from suicide and 1 in a drunk driving accident. All within 3 months of each other. That was awful. Except they all happened within 1 week. On Monday, 1 kid died in a car accident. On Friday, there was a suicide, and then the following Monday there was another suicide. None of the incidents were related. All these deaths were just from my graduating class. There was another girl that was 2 grades ahead of me who died after her family got struck by a train while driving. Don't know the specifics as to how it happened, but the mom, dad, and daughter all died. The only survivor was the girl's little brother, who was an infant. My sister was in the same year as her, so I got to see the remaining family members walk up to the stage to collect her diploma. Absolutely heart-wrenching to see the little brother walk up with the family on that day. An electrician screwed up rewiring her family's house, so a live wire was touching a metal pipe connected to the bath. Her mom was wearing rubber work boots when she filled the bath, so wasn't electrocuted, but she must have accidentally brushed against the tap or gone to add some more water while submerged and was dead instantly. We lived in a very small town where everyone knew each other, so it really rocked our community. She was in the grade above me, so would have been around 10-11. That's why every electrician needs to know Ohm's law and proper grounding, or GFEI. I love my job. Some days are hard, but you absolutely have to pay attention to what you're doing. Plus, that hurts bad. I've had 120 volts feel like nothing, and it also make me scream. Current has a lot to play into. Electrocution, which is death by electricity. Getting shocked. Well, you yourself was grounded, or you touched something with voltage and something else metal. Meningitis outbreak. All the schools in the area had to get inoculated. A girl in my graduating class died from meningitis just a few days before graduation. We weren't close at all, though she was always kind to me. So I found out when they had a moment of silence for her name as they were handing out diplomas. The juxtaposition of the ceremony that's supposed to mark the beginning of our lives as adults with the realization that hers had just ended was surreal. Self-inflicted shotgun to the head. She was mercilessly bullied throughout school. Junior year of high school, and it was too much. The school and diocese consistently turned blind eye to bullying and other disciplinary complaints towards children from priority families. The priest had the audacity at the funeral to talk about the selfishness and sin of suicide. I came to post a virtually identical story. One of my best friends from middle school ed herself our freshman year of high school. Both another close friend and I had moved away the summer prior, and apparently the rest of our friend group completely turned on her when school started. She was savagely bullied for months, being physically and wally assaulted near daily. The other friend and I knew very little about it because, again, we weren't around. She ed herself about a week after her 15th birthday with her dad's handgun and named her older brother as one of her worst abusers in her note. Her family's statement just said that she was a troubled young girl who didn't have a clear sense of judgment about those around her. He bragged about now being an only child on MySpace. I couldn't bring myself to go to her funeral because people were using her death to garner attention online, claiming to have been her friend. I miss you, Kay. In high school, I had a friend that had a troubled family life. He was living with foster parents and ran away back to his family on the reserve. They were First Nations, Cree specifically. He got picked up by our equivalent of CPS and was being transported back to his foster family's house in town. While on the highway, he jumped out of the car while it was traveling at a low speed. He got hit by another car in the oncoming lane going 100 kph. Looking back on it 20 years later, it is still painful. He was such a good guy. It breaks my heart to think of how much he missed his family and was willing to risk his life to go back to them. Despite the abuse and drug use, he just didn't feel like he belonged in his foster family's house. They were decent people, just not his family. There was another kid I went to school with, but barely knew. She had a few disabilities and health issues. She passed from some kind of heart condition a fake. Drinking in a car with 3 friends, and when the police came they fled, driving at a high rate of speed. They missed the turn when the road made a T. There was a massive tree directly behind the double arrow sign and they wrapped the car around it. To make the situation worse, the police arrived and refused help to the screaming teens until after they interrogated them. 3 of the boys died and the 4th was in a body cast for 6 months and in rehabilitation for years with permanent disabilities. The parents sued the police for not helping the boys and allowing them to bleed out. The parents won and the disabled boy has enough money to cover his care for the remainder of his life. The boys did break the law and were stupid, but for the police to tell them that they are going to allow them to die if they don't answer their questions and then they died was inexcusable on any level, and they should have been charged, not just fired. Friend from high school died his freshman year of college at a fraternity hazing. The frat was already banned from having any events on campus, so the hazing ritual was done off campus at some house they rented off Airbnb. Guy was a good man, always nice to others, and had a great sense of humor. I don't think he had much experience with alcohol cause he turned blue after the hazing and was found unresponsive on a couch sometime later. His frat decided to quietly drop him off to the hospital and left him there all alone. He died about 4 days later in the hospital. He was hooked onto a bunch of machines and sadly didn't recover. The alcohol had done irreparable damage to his liver. His parents sued the university, but the courts ended up ruling in favor of the school. Aside from the legal battle, his parents lost their youngest child. That's never easy to process. Almost 7 years later, and I still think about him from time to time. I wanted to attend his funeral, which was on a Friday, but I had a final exam for my German class and couldn't reschedule it without rescheduling my summer break. Traveling plans. I regret not attending the funeral. It would have given some sort of closure, being with friends and having time to just be in each other's company. There are a few. One kid when I was a junior and he was a sophomore was riding a quad and didn't see a cable across the dirt path. I know a couple of his friends who were riding with him. Apparently, he got almost completely decapitated. One of them was playing tennis and just dropped dead. He was part of a group that liked to experiment with ecstasy, and the thought is he took too much of it and it ed with his heart. Not sure if that is true or not, but he was very popular and the whole school was pretty sad. I played baseball with him when I was younger, and my family was friends with his family, so it ed a lot. One of my best friends was ed in a work accident after she graduated. I was a year behind her and so was a lot of her friends, so that one hit our group really hard. Someone I went to school with got ed by police a few years ago. He was the dumbest person I had ever met, but somehow still had all C's in school. Never once saw him do any schoolwork in any of the classes we shared. He also happened to be the best athlete my school had ever seen and still holds football records 15 years later. He was ed because he assaulted a bus driver. When the police arrived, he started fighting them. They tried tasing him after trying to just take him down. They tried pepper spray after that, then they used batons. He took one of their batons from the cops and started hitting them with it, so they shot him. It led to the mayor, who was a distant relative of his, leading a protest against the cops. It was a clearly justified shooting, and there was video of the whole thing thanks to some people recording, who also happened to yell at the cops after because they were idiots. The guy that died was also a massive hole to me and my friends in school, but even we felt sort of bad for him. He was mentally ill from drugs and homeless, but his family acted like they loved him and cared for him, but they didn't give about him once he lost his scholarship for football. In high school, a girl in the year ahead went missing. There were flyers posted for volunteers to help search for her. It was understood that she wasn't the type to run away. Her mom was out of her mind with worry. A few weeks later, her stepfather was arrested. It seems he'd Wally abused her and then switched from her to her little sister. She threatened to tell, and he murdered her. Then he drove her body out somewhere to dump it with her little sister in the car. She was too traumatized to remember much. Apparently, he put her body in a dumpster and it ended up in a landfill somewhere. They got a confession out of the guy by putting him in Gen Pop and letting the other prisoners know what he was in for. He lasted less than 2 days. Her name was Debbie Moberg. Hung himself. I was really good friends with him since maybe 5th grade, but I knew him since kindergarten. We weren't talking that much for a bunch of 9th grade, but we really started talking again, and then he died. I was doing multiple school projects with him at the time, but I ended up not having to do them. I was told by my crying mom, and my dad was pretty much crying because of me having to deal with that. There were no clues, or did he ever say anything about his thoughts. Before that year started though, his mom told my mom that he's been having bad anxiety and maybe to not talk to him. He was happy to talk anyways. It was a big story, and there were people from schools away who knew about it, and the classes I was with him in were pretty much pure sadness and crying. The English class was the worst though. I was crying with my head down on my desk, but the co-teacher in that class comforted me. I worked with her until I graduated last year. God bless her soul.